Thank you, everybody, for your amazing contributions. So now we've had a very diverse, very wide spread, beginning from early music, ending up with live coding, exploring the relationship between music, algorithms, mathematics, organized systems, the invention of the computer. So I would like to throw in some starting point, and we see how everything evolves. So one aspect I think that we should question ourselves is how to locate the algorithmic in the world of music, because our exhibition, as well as this part of the symposium, focuses very strongly on algorithmic techniques, on formal systems, rule systems. But the question is what role this plays in the entire set of music. Like if you think, for instance, in early music, is this a special phenomenon, or could we argue that implicitly most music is algorithmically driven, but we might not be aware of it? These are interesting questions that we could discuss. And another point that I would want to bring out is that if we see this trajectory from, say, these early Indian approaches, the early Renaissance approaches, up to the present-day computational music, when we start backwards from what Alexandra, for instance, showed us, or what Miller implicitly showed us, once we have computational systems around and we program them, music suits very well this kind of approach because it's built in. It's the music that we have programmed. If we look at the system that originates naturally, say the tonal system, the Indian musical system, it is not exactly well suited to computational approaches. Like, for instance, Richard and I witnessed in our project that even though we have a system where we can explicitly denote what performers are doing, it is very, 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 very hard to actually come up with the algorithm that really describes what's going on, because there's the human addition to it, which is very, very hard to formalize, which every performer of Indian music does. Or similarly, with the several musical programming languages that exist, like Common Music, for instance, C Sound, and name them all, there are fantastic tools to describe synthesized sound or to do things that programmers can easily do, like to rotate things, to generate random numbers, to play with these. But they are not very useful or not very well suited at all to compose tonal music with it. Like, try to compose a Schubert string quartet with it, you will have massive problems. And so I want to start this round discussion about discussing the role of algorithmic thinking across music as we've seen it now. So this is the first point that I want to throw in. Please.
Now that my throat is a bit clear, I want to take the opportunity to share my thoughts about it. I think not only music, but everything is algorithmic in nature. I think that's the way life creates things, and that's actually the main theme of my installation, which is called life codes. I think when with our minds are not capable to describe an algorithm, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I think that's what we would call chaos. It would be a pattern so big that we can explain. And I think technology has always been a mirror for our level of consciousness and awareness of what life is and what we are doing here. So the more we advance in our intelligence, in our clarity, in our consciousness, the more we will be able to make amazing use of the capabilities, technological capabilities we have. And digital technologies are being exponentially bringing this to this reflection, no? So it's not that technologies are something, they are us. It's not something outside of us. We have been using the newest technologies always, and algorithms are part of it. So yeah, not only in music, but in everything in our experience, I would say.
So I had just a thought coming into my mind. If you say it's hard to make a computer produce Schubert music, But if you ask the question of is maybe could any kind of music being described as being algorithmic? So it boils down to the question if the humankind algorithmic in a way, are we computing systems? And the question is the universe a huge computer? There are people who say the universe is a huge computer, it's a cellular automata. I don't drop the name of the gentleman who pretends that. And there are other people who say that they don't think that everything of human phenomena can be computable. So it's a question of computational incompleteness. So there's another gentleman who stresses that it's impossible for computability to simulate every phenomena, including music or art.
Yeah. Or if I may bring your point to a provocative question, to an even more provocative statement, I think one question that you raise here is the question about reducibility or irreducibility of human creativity. I think this is an important part that we're talking about. Whether in the end, implicitly or explicitly, human creativity can be modeled algorithmically, or whether it's an irreducible biological phenomenon.
Or incompressible, another term.
Which is a very similar statement.
I have two opinions in my heart. I'm also a chess player. And
me too.
I know. And there was this AE called AlphaZero several years ago, which learned the game for himself within 2 days, I think, yeah? And was able to beat the strongest machines existing before. And when you look at the games, they are very creative. They are magic in some details. So this is the one side. On the other side, when I my theme was the 17th century. Looking there, it is relatively easy to say where algorithmic thinking, what can it produce, and where are the real boundaries and the lack to the practice of composition and the real beauty of music. So yes, that are two opinions, and my thinking is driven from one side to the other.
May I comment on the AlphaZero? So, or this leads us to an interesting point here. So in the literature on creativity, there's a big distinction that one should draw, which is about closed systems creativity and open system creativity. So closed system creativity would be an example like find an interesting chess move, or for instance, compose a good Bach chorale with a closed system, we know the rules, or compose a good ragtime. Whereas open creativity would be something like change the rules of chess so that there is less draws, or find another system of music or like even without a description, find another system of music that is interesting, whatever that means. And so we have like open world creativity problems and we have closed world creativity problems. So in closed world creativity problems, like chess, creativity is often characterized by the fact that we have a huge search space that we can't understand, like the search space of chess is huge, where we can validate a solution. So we can validate whether a move is good by, for instance, winning, but we can't easily access this part of the search space because the space is too large. And so a creative solution in a closed system is often a solution where we come up with some method, whatever it is. It might be some kind of computational sampling method, or in this case, self-play of the machine against each other, by which we access regions of the space which cannot be seen straight ahead. And therefore, they serve for us as a creative point, even though the system is very well defined. And so we should not confuse open system creativity with closed systems creativity. And And one of the things that we should discuss here, or that might be interesting to discuss, is what we talk about when we talk about musical creativity, musical algorithms, whether we talk about one or the other system, or whether, yeah, just as a footnote to that.
I don't have anything to add to that. Well, I will say this about closed system creativity, that notion, that is precisely the thing that our machine learning algorithms are designed to do. And
exactly.
In fact, always really do when you analyze what they're set up, what they're set at. And that's interesting. I hadn't heard that concept before, but that sort of frees someone to think about, well, could you even make a computer exhibit what you would call open system or open creativity? I don't see how you would do it, but that doesn't mean it can't be done.
Yes, one last thought about chess. We return to music. The thing was with Alpha Zero that, in a way, he played very human and made things you cannot understand. I've seen games, and he, human in, for example, to give material for long-term compensation. This is, you can normally you need intuition to make such things, but this happened in these games, and the machine made a small move at the side of the board, A line, and 20 moves later, this was the decisive factor in an end game. So, but I don't know how to transfer this to music. And by the way, I found it completely not interesting to let the computer compose Bach chorales. What is the point?
Well, so there's a potentially big difference between having a computer model that plays chess with a computer model that plays music, which is like in chess, you have a very clear reward function. The reward function is whether you're able to win. So you have a clear goal for which you can optimize. Now, in the musical case, this is not straightforward at all. Whether you can have a clear analog or what the clear analog is. So some systems are trained on self-reproduction. So you run the system until it's very well able to reproduce the things that that was in the input data. But if you think it in more philosophical terms, there might be a very fundamental, huge difference here between the musical system and the game of chess. Or like I see Bob Sturm big in thought. I'm sure you have a number of ideas about this as well. But yes.
Well, the rewarding decision would be if the music is successful. So if it's commercial music, will it bring the most of money in? So, but how to define this function is maybe the challenge.
Yeah. So we're basically placing the selection function and the reward not to the individual composition, not to the individual listener, but to the evolutionary process, which could also be seen as an information optimizing process, as for instance modeled by David McKay. So indeed, this might be some relevant thought where we just change the system about which we think in which we think about music. Richard was about to say something as well, I think.
Well, it was just inspired by your distinction between. Sorry, what was it? With
open and closed system.
Open and closed system creativity, because the idea of the closed system creativity, I think, describes very well what Indian musicians, the sort of conceptual space they inhabit, because it is a lot of emphasis is placed on preserving the tradition, keeping to the conventions, at the same time as saying that, of course, the musician must improvise, must be spontaneous, and must be creative whilst performing. These two things might seem to be in opposition with each other, but it is very much a case of trying to find new things within a traditional system and a traditional style. And the reason for that, I think, is not only just a sort of knee-jerk thought that one has to preserve the past, but it's about communication. It's about a very special kind of communication between the audience, the performer, and the audience, so that if the audience are sufficiently familiar with the musical style and the musical system, they will recognize what is coming out of the music. The idea that a raga is something that the aesthetic experience is one of recognition. That is the key phrase of that raga, which the musician has brought out very beautifully. So he might not have played that exact phrase in exactly that way before, but somehow it just captures the nature of this raga, and the listener enjoys recognizing it and being inspired by the beauty. There are musicians who occasionally that will create a new raga, but it's very rare that that is taken up by other musicians. So that is definitely not the emphasis of the tradition to create new ragas. That happens relatively rarely. It is to find new ways of bringing out the essence of what has been learned by the musicians and by audiences. So yeah, definitely closed system creativity. Thank you. I will use that phrase from now on.
Microphone. Does this? Yes, it does. It works. I have a question actually for Miller here, right beside me, because I was very intrigued by your closing provocation. It seemed to me that when we're speaking about all these examples of algorithmic behavior, shall we say, the common denominator they all seem to have is notation in some way or other, and given your background, I was wanting to ask you, since you asked us to think beyond a certain way of conceiving, I mean, if I understood you correctly, you were asking us to think beyond algorithms in terms of how we think about music, or perhaps I've misunderstood. Certainly, perhaps you were saying about which kinds of sound, or how we think about the sounds that we're transforming or working on as our source material. Perhaps I've misunderstood you, but you're here to correct me if I have. Is there anything? Could you perhaps expand on that? Because I was very interested by that, but I'd like to know more what you're getting at, if you can articulate it.
I don't know if I can. I also don't even know if what I'm saying is logically consistent. So one thing about alphabetical systems, which computers and many other things are based upon, is that they permit you to transmit ideas because you need them you need shared alphabets or shared structures, as you're saying, so that you can be operating within a tradition, such as the tradition of using these particular pitches or something like that, or these particular tokens or symbols. And yet that at the same time limits us to to what those things are. Perhaps what I'm reaching for, but I don't really know what I'm reaching for, because if I knew, I would go get it. But perhaps what we're reaching for is a way of being more plastic in the choice of representation that we use, in such a way that we can still represent things, but that the representation is modifiable in a way that frees us in directions that we're not free in right now. And this is a complaint not so much about thought systems as it is about the way we use computers, or the way even we design music sometimes, which is, fall into a particular way of representing a thing, and then it happens the way the representation allows us to make it happen. So what would you do if you wanted a thing that that allowed the representation itself to be slipping and sliding around as you're representing your thing in it. And that's a design a very open design question.
So I guess I could ask: Are computers currently capable of that?
Well, computer will do anything you can figure out how to program it to do. I think the problems are up here. So I just saw 3 hands go up in the back of the room. So I think we should.
Me again. Question for the audience. Are there any musicians here? Oh, wow. Oh, great. Super. I'm not alone. And you're happy with this? I am a musician vicariously. My mom is a Soviet classic pianist, so I literally grew up in an opera house and in the Philharmonics. And my question is very simple. Why do you do this? When music was digitalized, there was a certain mission, a purpose of making music acceptable, diverse, of shining the light on new artists, on changing the playing field. What is the mission that you are pursuing? Why are you doing this? And by the way, as a footnote, closed system and creativity are oxymorons.
Let's pass this question on to the composers amongst us, maybe.
I don't know why I'm doing this. Only thing I know is that I have a fire that compels me to do this, which is I want to make music, I want to use computers, and I want to free music from societal brainwashing that I have been receiving all my life. And I want to be able to bring heart into the digital culture and see what I can learn from other people. And that's why that's what led me to do what I do.
Yes, I also compose a bit, but without computer help. This is not my interest. But for, as Fabrice mentioned, for other purposes.
Excuse me, could you please repeat the last part of your question? What was what is the oxymoron? Wow. Okay. I think that you need. It is helpful to start working with closed systems as a starting point. As a composer, I suppose you always have the hope that what you, the work, whatever it is going to do things that you didn't know it would. That's to say, hopefully, if it's a success from your standpoint, it might do the things that you were imagining that it would do. I'm always hopeful that the work will also do stuff that I wasn't expecting. And it doesn't have to be a major, a game-changing thing. It can just be a moment that I was not expecting would be there and that really pleases me and that somehow maybe energizes the whole piece in a way that I wasn't expecting. That still is arising out of a closed form. And so a closed form in itself, I don't think is necessarily, is not necessary, does not necessarily exclude, well, it does not exclude the surprise, the thing that makes, what we call art worth experiencing. So I guess I would want to understand a bit more about this. where your feeling of this oxymoronic comes from, because ultimately there's, for example, there's a wonderful title of a piece. I think that it was by Michael Finnessy, who lifted it, I think, from Foucault, I think, which he called Multiple Forms of Constraint, and it's a piece for string quartet. And I just use that as a title because I think that multiple forms of constraint as an idea, you're basically, even working within closed systems, I think can produce something unexpected and rich. So that, I guess that's just my reaction to that, to that statement as well, as a composer and for what it's worth. Oh no, these belong here. Okay, great.
Thank you. I am also a composer. I don't write music for computers. I write scores and graphic or electric scores, or the traditional notation styles. But the last piece that I wrote a week ago, it was a proposal from a programmer that he was developing an AI program. So he asked me to give him a duet, a piano duet. The one piano will be a human player, and the other will be a computer. So he will take my score, which is traditional notation, in a finale music notation program, and he will give it to his program, and his program will make something out of my music. I don't know yet because the concert is at November, what I will hear. But the big problem was that I was thinking how I can compose for a computer. It's not a human. You have totally different aspects from a computer. You don't know what he can do, what he can't do, because a human, you know, I write something very difficult or I write something simple. But for the computer, you don't know anything. So I was starting to play with AI, ChatGPT, and this kind of stuff to understand. I starting to make stories, and I give keywords at ChatGPT, so to see how it will make the story with the ingredients that I give it. And that was like a new tool for composition, because I had to think different ways of how to intrigue the computer. And yeah, that's a new tool for us, I think, the technology and all the possibilities that we have.
We had a question by Bob Sturm.
I think the question of why we do what we do, I hope to provide some motivation for that. But on closed versus open system creativity, I think we're forgetting an important aspect of this, and that's the user. These systems don't exist in a roped-off coordinate place. They're used by users, and the history of computer music is one of composers finding and exploiting those edge cases, the bugs, and misapplying the technology. So the involvement of users with these systems really opens up possibilities.
Very good point. Thank you very much. Yes?
Also on the notion of open and closed systems, I recently read a paper, Future Art Ecosystems, published by Serpentine Galleries, which is on art and public AI and contains a list of recommendations also for artists, how to relate to the new tools such as AI and blockchain in their creative practice, also trying to predict what changes for such artists. And referring to this notion of open and closed systems, as you said, it's for the computer. It's a completely different task to solve an open-ended question such as how to compose a piece of music. But of course, from the perspective of music composer, I would start by first designing some system in which my musical piece will operate. So what I read in the document was one of the recommendations is basically that in the answer to these new tools, artists become system builders, basically. And system builders, as in they can create systems such as new AI models or such as new algorithms, whatever ways they would do it. But this, even though it is a recommendation in a document speaking of new technologies, it feels to me quite natural from the music composer perspective that this is practically the way things were, as Fabrizio used it to mention. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to add one point on the open and closed system distinction as well, and to add a point also on the seeming contradiction between creativity, freedom, and closed systems. So it seems first that creativity requires a lot of space, but often the opposite is the case. So for instance, I've taught several workshops on bringing non-musicians or like bringing classical musicians to improvisation. And if you just start like, feel free, do what you do, nothing happens. If you start with giving them a selection of 4 notes to use only 4 notes, immediately creativity starts to pour out. Once you restrict the possibilities, in the opposite, freedom becomes possible. That's something that's also very well known in the psychological literature on creativity. So to put an example of the opposite, if you give unlimited freedom, the task is very, very hard. For instance, there's a famous test for creativity, which is called the paperclip test. We can, I would not spend the time now with the audience to do it, but I tell you how it works. So you get a certain amount of time, say 2 minutes, 3 minutes, have a sheet of paper in front of you, and you have to write down everything that you can think of to do with a set of paper clips in front of you. So this is a typical open system creativity task. It's incredibly hard. So an average adult manages to write down 20 to 25 things. An average 4-year-old manages to write down, if he can write, 120 things. And again, this illustrates freedom is often a block for creativity, unlike as it seems if you look at it for the first time. So this is some sources where this could be read up in greater detail is the book on creativity by Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, as well as the work by Margaret Bowden, for instance. But just to close on this topic. So there was another question here as well.
Hello. So I think I'm closest to Alexandra up there because I also perform live music with coding and also synthesizers. And I'm sure Alexandra's experienced this when you work with technology that's really continuous, I would say, relative to other instruments, things can go wrong in a really big way. So I think the introduction of the algorithmic into music also brings with it the introduction of like the crash or the like catastrophic failure. So I was wondering, either in your respective fields, I think for Alexandra, the way I'm posing the question, it makes it obvious, like, how do you respond to a crash in the middle of a set? Like, how quickly does it take your system to reboot? And because music is distinctly temporal, I think it's different than if an AI system designed for visual art crashes, you can restart the process. But with music, it becomes part of the performance. So I was wondering, maybe you have an experience that you want to mention, or maybe just in general, like a strategy. And I'm also curious from the other disciplines if you could describe what catastrophic failure means for you when for algorithmic music. Where's my
So yeah, it is very good that I love John Cage so much, because the first time I played in Europe, it was a very important event for me. And I forgot to put a comma in Super Collider. So we had 9 minutes of silence. So yeah, it was double 433. And when someone in the audience said, "You're missing a comma," then I started looking for commas. I put the comma, and then we had 4 minutes of a very nice piece, I would say. And that was a traumatic event, let's say. For me, of course, new coming to Europe, I wanted to, to show my best side. And that was life, like, be humble, no? And one of the main philosophies of live coding actually is accepting errors. That's why we show our screens. And then you get this error. Actually, the main picture that I saw it had a big error. And I decided to leave it there because it's part of it. And that's what a programmer does, deal with errors. And actually, that's what we do every day, dealing with our errors, the errors of others, the errors of our society, the errors of it. It's part of us. So after being trained as a composer, classical guitarist first, not to make errors, it was so difficult to unlearn, to let the errors be part of the intrinsic beauty of the thing you're making. So it's, I would say, live coding, yeah, you have amazing, super virtuoso musicians, super virtuoso programmers, but I make emphasis that it needs virtuosism in the emotional aspect. What happens when everybody sees you there and you feel naked? And they are seeing that you forgot the comma. Oh my God. Yeah, baby, deal with it. That's life. You pretend to put your masks all the time. But we can see through those, and it's fine because we all are one. Because these tools are made by our friends and we are collaborating here, and then maybe the computer made an update that you weren't expecting right before the performance, and it doesn't sound anymore the way you wanted it to sound, then it's like, okay, how are you going to calm yourself down and make a piece of music out of what you have? Last night, I put a wrong number and I got a sample that was so out of control. And I was like, okay, maybe here I am again, repeating the same. It won't stop. And I hope it won't stop because it keeps me on my toes. If I wanted to have a perfect thing, I would buy some commercial software and I would call IT, I'm sorry, I got a sample that got out of control. But it's my responsibility, as all our lives are our responsibility, including the errors. And that's not bad. So I think, again, technology is a mirror that reflects our emotional state, everything.
Thank you very much. Absolutely.
A way of thinking about these things, as I understand it, we're very much talking in terms of creativity something that comes out of us. But Indian musicians, of course, they have to learn the repertoire, and they have to learn their technique. But then they say that in the moment of performance, they get into a state where the music seems to be coming from somewhere else and flowing through them. The raga, for example, the melodic mode, they say the raga takes over. And so it's no longer somehow just their creative performance, but something coming from somewhere else. In terms of correcting mistakes or dealing with mistakes, that comes in with respect to the metrical structure. You're playing within a metrical cycle of so many beats. You may be improvising and aiming to end your improvisation on the first beat of the next cycle. That's the normal thing to do. And so, of course, if you miss that beat, it's rather obvious to the audience that you've made a mistake. So the way musicians deal with this is to make small adjustments so that it does work. But not at the last minute. You have to do it a little ahead of time so that it's not obvious. If you make the correction right just at the last minute, then it's obvious to the audience. But you should be able to think sufficiently ahead to foresee the possibility that you're making a mistake and correct in advance.
Thank you very much. I think this links very well back to what we said before about the reducibility or irreducibility of human creativity. And as you mentioned, this the notion of the raga taking over the improviser, jazz musicians reporting similar things, for instance, when they're playing, when they're in a state of flow. Again, another very remarkable book by Csikszentmihalyi, the book on flow states, with a specific chapter on art. And to wrap up another point from our discussion, I think an important source of creativity is not only the constructive element, but also the error element, which is at the same time the leading element in natural biological evolution. The error is an element that brings evolution forward. And so we should reconcile or rethink the important roles of making errors in the creative process. So, having said this, I think we have reached a nice circle and we are about at the end of our time. So let's thank again our speakers, our presentations, and this round of discussion of the algorithmic in music and beyond this morning.